Masechet Yevamot Daf Kof Gimel. We're going to be talking about different types of shoes again, and the Mishnah mentioned an anpalya, kind of a sock or soft shoe. The Mishnah said that anpalya is no good because it's not a shoe; it's a sock. However, we saw some other sources regarding Yom Kippur and walking on Harabayit, where it indicated that anpalya is a shoe. So how do we resolve all of these sources? Rava's answer was that it depends what it's made out of. If the anpalya is made out of leather, then it's considered a shoe, and you can use it for chalitza. If it's made out of cloth, then it's not a shoe, it's a sock, and then you cannot use it for chalitza. And now we bring a proof that Rava is correct. Tenya kevated Rava. Here's a braita where we're going to see this very distinction spelled out. The braita also includes a bunch of other cases. If someone uses a shoe that's all opened up, that's torn open, but it can still cover the majority of a person's foot, that's okay. Or it's been cut away, but nevertheless there's still enough left that it can cover most of the foot. If it's made out of cork or tree fibers, bekav hakiteya, or a prosthetic foot of an amputee, bemuk, mefelt, it's a hard substance, so it's good. Besmichat haraglaim, leg blankets, an amputee would put something over his stumps to make it more comfortable to put pressure on. Banpilia shel or, and here we go. Here's this anpilia item that's made out of leather. This is also going to be kosher. Bacholeset min hagadol, and anytime yavam is an adult, that's good. Katan can't do it. We're going to contrast all these in a second. Ben Omed, Ben Yoshe, Ben Muta, and whether the yavam is standing or sitting or leaning or lying down, or if the man is blind, all these cases, the chalitza is okay. Sounds like b'diavad. Each one of these cases has some minor problem, but b'diavad, it's good. אבל במנהל הנפרם שאין חופז רוב הרגל בסנדל נפחת שאינו מקבל את רוב הרגל. But if you have a shoe that's torn or broken or ripped away and it cannot cover the majority of a person's foot, that's no good. Bismichat hayadayim, cloths that an amputee would put around his hands, since he has to use his hands in order to move around. Those are not considered, since they're on his hands, they're not considered shoes. Uban palya shel beged, and here we go, an anpalya made out of cloth, no good. And if the yavam is a minor, in all these cases, even b'diavad, the chalitza is no good. So here you go, explicitly makes a difference, separates anpalya of leather, which is good, and of cloth, which is not good. That's exactly what Rava answered when explaining the other braitot regarding Yom Kippur. Okay, Kava Kiteya Maneh, Rabbi Meir he. Now, who says that in this Mishnah, who would be the opinion that says an amputee's prosthetic limb would be okay to use? It must be Rabbi Meir, because regarding Hilchot Shabbat, there was a question there whether an amputee can carry his a wooden leg on Shabbat. Is that considered carrying, or is it he's wearing it like a shoe? And Rabbi Meir says it's permitted for him to go outside with it because he's wearing it, which means, according to Rabbi Meir, that is considered his shoe. And since that's considered a shoe for Shabbat, also for chalitza, it's permitted to use. Rabbi Yosef, regarding Hilchot Shabbat, says no, this is just something he's carrying around. It's not considered a shoe, and therefore he's not wearing it, but rather carrying the wooden prosthetic, and that's prohibited. So you see, Rabbi Yosef does not consider it a shoe, not for Shabbat, and therefore would not consider it a shoe for chalitza. So therefore, our Mishnah must be the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Hold on, ban palya shel beged atan le rabanan. Here's the problem. This wooden prosthetic is not made out of leather; it's made out of wood, and yet Rabbi Meir says it's okay. But now, when it comes to this anpalya that's made out of cloth, that baraita said it's not good. But according to Rabbi Meir, if it's a prosthetic, if it's something that an amputee uses. If it's according to the B'meir, even if it's not made out of leather, as long as it's used like a shoe, it should be permitted. And so that sect, the sefa, must be a Rabbanan, meaning it must be not the opinion of the B'meir, because B'meir would permit something that's used as a shoe, even if it's not made of leather, even if it's only wood. So he should permit even if it's made out of cloth. So now we have a problem. We don't know who the author is. So we'll see a couple of answers. Amar Abaye. מדספר רבנן רשע נמי רבנן ורשע במחופה or. In fact, since the sefa is rabbanan because it has to be made out of leather, right? If it's made out of cloth, it's no good. So therefore, that's not the B'meir, but rather those who disagree with the B'meir. And therefore, the resha that says when the prosthetic is permitted, it's not only the B'meir, but rather it could even be the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, and it's talking about a case where it's covered with leather. That's why it's a certain prosthetic that's covered with leather, it's made with leather, and therefore it can be considered a shoe. But if it was not leather, it would not be considered a shoe. Okay, so now we're making this ukimta. It doesn't say it's made out of leather, but we're making that assumption. Amar le Rava, aval en mechupa or mai pasul. Rava challenges Abaye and says, so the prosthetic limb or shoe is only kosher, is only valid if it's covered with leather. So now what if it's not covered with leather? Then it would not be good? Mishnah, this Baraita doesn't say anything about that. Ihachi adetane sefa ban palya shel beged liflog bedida. If that was true, then that would be an important distinction for the Baraita to make. More significant, in fact, than talking about an anpalya that's made out of cloth. Instead of bringing a new case about an anpalya of cloth, it should make a distinction within the prosthetic leg itself and say, when is a prosthetic leg permitted? Only if it's covered with cloth. But if it's not covered with cloth, then it would be no good, right? This would be an important distinction to make. In addition to the anpalya distinction, it should also make a distinction within the prosthetic leg. Ela amar Rava midrasha Rabbi Meir sefana Rabbi Meir. Rava says, no, I think that the entire thing is Rabbi Meir, and I can answer the question you had before. Hai megen v'hai la megen. There is a big difference between something made out of wood and something made out of cloth. A prosthetic foot that's made out of wood, that protects a person. So it's put a lot of weight on it. You can use it. Whereas this kind of sock that's made out of cloth, that does not protect the foot. It's not hard, and if you step on something, on a rock, it will hurt. So therefore, that's why the first is a shoe, the second one is not a shoe. Even though they're both not made out of leather, it still depends if it's made out of hard material or soft material. Okay, good. Amar Amemar, Haiman dechales sarich lemid hase lechara'eh. Amemar teaches that so when you're doing chalitza, the yavam has to press his foot to the ground, and then the Yevamot can come and remove it. Because if he's hanging his foot in the air, then it's not clear that the Yevamot is removing it. It looks like it's just falling off. So therefore, he has to have his foot on the ground with some weight on it. And then she unties it while his foot is on the ground, and then pulls it off, so that she is clearly using her own strength to take it off, and it's not just falling off. Good. We're bringing this in because we challenge it from the Braita that we just cited. Says that the Yavam can be standing or sitting or lying down. So how does that work? I understand standing. That's good. Then his feet are on the ground. Even sitting, you make sure to sit and you put your feet on the floor. But if he's leaning or lying down, then that's harder to do. So we say, Ema ulam dedachis lechad. Yeah, you have to add in that condition that it could be he's leaning or lying down, but he has to make sure that his foot will in fact be on the ground. This is like when you're lying down on a couch with your shoes on. So you put your shoes feet on the ground and not on the couch. So you could be lying down but still have your feet with some weight on them on the ground. Okay, another halacha from the same sage. If someone walks on the back of his feet, in other words, someone has a condition called clubfoot, in which they are born with their ankle turned to the side or turned backwards, and they don't walk on their heels, but rather on the side or even the front of their foot if it's turned all the way around. So a person who has this problem cannot do chalitza because he can't put his weight on the heel of his foot. Hadaglaim labde halis ba ihu. Hold on. Didn't we say in the Braita that the supports for legs, right? Those cloths that one puts on legs or some kind of a crutch, so that's good. You can use that as for chalitza. Doesn't that mean that this person himself, the person who is himself has a deformity, is using them, and that means that such a person with a deformity, even like this, can do chalitza because these are considered his shoes. And we say no, la de'ahev la'ached v'chales. No, it's talking about a case where the person with the deformity who usually uses it gave it to someone with regular healthy feet and says, here, you can use this. So the person with regular healthy feet puts them on, and as long as they fit him, then it is considered a shoe. So the point is, it is considered a shoe, but it can only be used by someone who has normal feet and puts his weight on them, on the heel, but cannot be used by someone who cannot put his weight on his heel. According to what Amemar said, now we understand a reference that we saw back in Moed Katan. You had these two people, Bar Uba and Bar Kipov. They were professional eulogizers. And if you remember the story, there was a funny story. Rav Ashi said, ask them, what are you going to say when I die? And so they made up a eulogy for him. And they said something that wasn't respectful. They said, even a big fish got caught today. What are the small fish going to do? Rav Ashi says, would you call me a big fish that's being caught? Is that a nice way to talk about the death of a righteous person? And so he was so upset that they ended up being cursed and their feet turned inwards. So therefore, because their feet were like that, they would not be able to do chalitza ever. So this is a proof that someone with this kind of clubfoot cannot do chalitza. All right, the Mishnah mentioned minar koba ulemata. If someone is an amputee below the knee, then that they can do chalitza. That's okay because the part below the knee is still called me'al, something that's above the foot. But if it's above the knee, the thigh, that's not considered a foot, and that person cannot do chalitza. Now we have a challenge. Urminhi regalim. Pasuk says shalosh regalim bashana. Right? You have to go and to Jerusalem during the festivals. The festival is called regalim because we walk there and when we are going to visit. So the Baraita says perat lebaale kabin. Someone who has a prosthetic leg does not have a mitzvah, is not required to go to Jerusalem because he can't walk there on his own 2 feet. He's using a prosthetic foot. What we see from here is that a prosthetic foot is not considered a foot, right? This person does not have a regel and therefore does not have to make aliyah. And whereas this contradicts our Mishnah that says someone with a prosthetic foot, at least if it's below the knee, is considered a regel and can do chalitza. How are we going to resolve this? Me'al raglo, regarding chalitza, says above his foot. Literally, it means just remove the shoe from his foot, me'al raglo, but it could have just said me raglo. So from me'al, from above his foot, meaning even if it's a layer above his foot, meaning the calf. that's also considered regel. So that's why it's permitted, even though in a different context, it would not be called, foot would not be called, the leg would not be called a regel. Okay, wait a second, if you permit something above the foot, then even if someone who's amputated above the knee, at his thigh, then he should also be permitted to do chalitza with whatever kind of prosthetic he puts on his leg. Me'al velo me'al de me'al. We answer no. It only says one time me'al and not above. So not two levels above, only one level above. And therefore, from the ankle to the knee, that's one level above is permitted. From the knee up to the thigh, up to the hip, is a second level above, and that's no good. All right. Amara papa shmami nahai istavira ad nahet. Now we have some anatomy here. We can learn from here that Papa teaches that the heel bone must reach the ground. In other words, this bone that goes, this leg bone goes all the way down to the heel. It must be all one bone, and that's why it's considered all foot, because the foot and the ankle and the calf are all connected as one bone or one limb, and therefore it can be considered a foot and usable for chalitza. Because if you would say that the heel bone is not connected, then that itself would be the me'al. Here's the foot, and then the heel or ankle bone would be the one level up. And if so, then the rest of the calf would be above, and then it wouldn't be good. So it must be that the ankle itself, the heel bone or ankle, is connected to the foot, and then therefore the calf is only one level above and not two. All right. Amar Rav Ashi, afilu tema mifsak pasik, kol de behadeh kar'a kechar'a dameh. Rav Ashi said not necessarily, even if it's a separate bone, it still can be considered all one, because anything that is connected with the sole of the foot is like part of the foot. So we're not necessarily. I mean, they knew about bone anatomy better than most of us do, because they dealt with bones on a more regular basis than most people do today. So they knew that these were separate bones and all that. Just the question is, what do you consider to be a unit, a limb? Where do you separate it if you're counting limbs, for example? He says, no, even if it's a separate bone, this is all connected. It's all one unit. And so therefore, even if it's a separate bone, it's one unit. And the entire foot, including the heel, is one. And therefore, the calf is one level above and is permitted. Good. And so now we're going to have 5 challenges. This is regarding word definition. What does the word regel mean? Does it mean the lower half of the leg or the upper half of the leg? So we know our Mishnah said that if it's above the knee, meaning the thigh, if someone's amputated there, then they cannot do chalitza, because they don't have a leg to stand on, so to speak. So here's one challenge. This is in the section of Kelalot at the end of Devarim. It says that there will be such hunger that a woman, is what terrible image to even think about, that they'll be so hungry that even the afterbirth that emerges from between her legs, she will be so hungry she will eat it. Okay, terrible image. But anyway, the point here is that it says ragleha, and she's giving birth from the from her thighs, the top of her legs, not the bottom, and yet it calls it ragleha. So that is also considered that is also considered regel, or feet, and therefore should leg, foot, right, are interchangeable, and therefore should be usable for chalitza, even if a person is amputated above the knee. And we answer, Amar Abaye, b'shah shekorat leled, noeset akebeha bi'adchoteha ve'yoledet. Abaye explains that when a woman crouches to give birth, so her heels are pressed against the back of her thighs. And so when she gives birth, it is in fact the afterbirth emerges, in fact, from between her feet, all the way to the bottom of the feet, because they are folded up. against her thighs, and therefore that's why it says ragleha. In fact, it does mean feet here. So no proof. Okay, second try. Tashema lo asa raglav velo asa sefamo. This is regarding Mephibosheth, who was in mourning. He came to David and showed how sad he was, and it says he did not do his feet or his mustache. A simple reading of this is that he did not cut his toenails or take care of his feet or cut his mustache. He was all disheveled. But the Gemara is taking it as raglav, meaning he did not shave his lower hair. Why would he? Did they do that then? I guess there were some cultures that men did that. But anyway, he it calls his lower privates raglav. Now that's clearly above the knee. So you see that the part of the leg all the way up above the knee is still called regel. So we answer lishna ma'alya. No, the Tanakh is using a euphemism. Doesn't want to talk about private parts explicitly, so it calls it regel, even though regel does not refer to section of the leg above the knee. It's only the feet below the knee. Okay, Tashema, another try. Vevosho lasech et raglav. Shaul went to cover his feet. It means to urinate. So where do you urinate from? Well, from above the knee. So doesn't the part of your leg and thigh all the way up mean regel refer to that? We say no. Lishna me'alya also wants to use a euphemism, so it talks about feet, even though it's referring to a part of his body that's way above his feet. Tashema ech ach masich hu raglav behadar hamechera. Regarding this is when Eglon was killed by Ehud. So he went to says, I have to meet him in private. The Jewish Ehud says, I have to meet the Moabite king Eglon in private. And so he goes in private and he stabs him right with his left. And then he leaves him there and he runs out and he closes the door behind him and everybody's like, oh, where's the king? He's been there in there a long time, covering his feet, meaning going to the bathroom. And then after they waited a while, they realized there's something wrong and they went in and they found his advisors found him dead. Okay, so anyway, it says here that he is covering his feet, but to say he's going to the bathroom. So doesn't that mean feet means even upper part of the thigh? No, lishna ma'alya, also it's using a euphemism. And last example, ben ragleha, again, lishana ma'alya. Regarding Yael, when Sisera was running away from the war in Devorah, war with Devorah and Barak, so Sisera, the general, was running away, and Yael comes and entices him, says, come to my tent, you can hang out, you could hide out over here. And it says she took the tent peg and killed him. And in the Shirat Devorah says ben ragleha, between her feet. We're going to see the Gemara is going to interpret that to mean that she had relations with him to wear him down. So it says between her feet. Now, between her feet, obviously, that means upper part all the way above her thighs, and yet it's referring to that as ragleha. So doesn't the regel mean even the upper part of the leg? And we say no. Lishna ba'aliyah is also using a euphemism. All right, now that we mentioned her, we can continue. Amar Rabbi Yochanan sheva beilot ba'aloto rasha be'oto hayom. On that day, Sisera had relations with Yael 7 times. She did that so he would lose his strength, and then she would be able to kill him. שנאמר בין רגליה קרה נפל שחה בין רגליה קרה נפל באשר קרה שם נפל שדוד. If you count all the times here, it says that between her legs and lay with her and so on. So it says 7 times these words. והכה מתהניה מעבירה. All right, now we have an ethical question to Yael. How is she allowed to do that? Isn't she also having pleasure from being with him, and so this should not be allowed. Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai kol tovatan shel reshaim ra'ahi esel sadiqim shene'emar hisha melecha pen tedaber im Yaakov mitob ad ra. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says you don't have to worry about that, because even something good from an evil person is considered evil for a Sadiq. You have to, think of an example of maybe a female spy who has to do certain things to get information from the guy. She's not enjoying it. She hates him, and she wants to kill him at any second. The other wants to kill him, and so this pleasure is not really called pleasure. It's since the whole point is she has so much hatred for him and is about to put a stake through his head. So we don't have to worry about that. And we learned this principle that something good that comes from an evil person is considered bad from when Hashem says to Lavan, go and send Yaakov off, and be careful, do not speak to him about Yaakov, good or bad. Now, why good or bad? Why not good? Okay, we understand not to say anything bad, right? That's true. That's right. Don't say anything bad to Yaakov. But why not? Why does Hashem tell Lavan, don't speak to Yaakov even anything good? You see, even something good, when it comes from a rasha, is still something evil. Like getting a compliment from some evil dictator. That if the evil person is giving you a compliment, then that's probably a bad sign. Okay, Bishlama hatam. Dilma midkad le shema da'avodah zara. So we understand in that case regarding Lavan, it makes sense in context, because in praising you, this evil person may mention idolatry, right? Lavan's going to come and say, oh, you know what? I want to bless you in the name of, and he mentions an idol. So he might even be trying to say something nice, but in doing so, he'll end up saying something that's blasphemous, idolatry. So that's true in that case. But in this case, so what evil was there? He said, I wasn't talking. What bad can come from the act that they had together? Why would that be considered to her to be an evil act? And the answer, when they had relations, he implanted her with some kind of impurity. That we call it a spiritual or kind of moral impurity of who he is and what he stands for. And we see this has its own backstory, that when the Nahash came unto Chava, and it's understanding that they had relations together, he implanted in her this impurity. I guess you can call it like a desire for sin, yetzer hara, evil desire. Yisrael shamdu al Har Sinai paska zohmatan. When the Israelite people were standing at Har Sinai, then that impurity left them. We could understand that as being the Torah, which prohibits any kind of immoral acts, and so therefore that desire for immoral activity would be controlled. So in that sense, as long as they follow the Torah, their impurity has left them. Whereas other nations that did not stand in Har Sinai and did not receive that antidote, their impurity did not cease, and therefore Sisera implanted within her this impurity, and that's the evil. So even something that normally would be something good or pleasurable, when it comes from an evil person, that is considered also evil to a righteous person. So therefore, don't worry about Yael. She received no benefit. That benefit or pleasure was in fact an evil in her eyes. We continue with the Mishnah that says, Chalsa b'min al she'eno shelo. Someone uses a shoe that he does not own, the chalitza is valid. Teno Rabbanan na'alo en li ela na'alo. Now the pasuk says he removes and she removes his shoe from his foot. which literally would sound like it does have to belong to him. Na'al shel kol adam minayin. How do you know that even if it's owned by somebody else, and this Yavam happens to be wearing it, that is still valid? Tamud omar na'al, because in the next pasuk it also says you're going to call him bet halus han na'al, the shoe, not his shoe. Mikol makom. So we learn from there that he doesn't actually have to own it. And the truth is that that is really the peshat. It just means the shoe that he's wearing. That's why it calls it na'alo, not necessarily that he has to own it. Okay, im ken ma tamud omar na'alo. So if that's the case, why does the pasuk say na'alo? Just say the shoe. She should remove the shoe. Why his shoe? So this is to teach that it has to be one that fits him. If it's too big and he can't walk in it, every time he takes a step it falls off, then that's no good. And if the shoe is too small, that it cannot cover most of his foot, he has to be able to get the majority of his foot into the shoe, then it's no good. Upirat the sandal ha-mesul-yam. Others have misul-yas, she'en lo akeb, a sandal that has no heel, also kind of like a slipper of today. Here's an actual ancient sandal. So if it has no heel support, then it's also not good because it's not tight-fitting. So that's what it means. Na'alo has to be one that fits him well. Abaye hava ka'e kamed Rav Yosef. Atay divama lachlos. And that was story. Abaye was sitting in front of Rav Yosef, his teacher, and Yevamot came and said, please, can you perform a chalitza, can you oversee a chalitza ceremony? Amale havle sandalach. So Rav Yosef, the teacher, tells Abaye, please give her your sandal. Sorry, give him your sandal. Give the Yavam your sandal. You have a good sandal that fits the criteria, has buckles and all that. So Yehevle sandala dismala. So Abaye takes off his left sandal and gives it to the Yavam. Amar le emar da'amur Rabbanan di avad lechatechila mi amor. So Rav Yosef said, no, the rabbis only said if you use a left sandal, then it's okay b'di avad, but they didn't say so lechatechila, right? Don't you know that? Why are you giving him the left sandal? Okay, Abaye was being a wise guy. He did this on purpose. He says, Amar le ihachi sandal sheno she'en shelo nameh emur da'amur Rabbanan di avad lechatechila mi amor. He wanted to make a point, and his point is that a sandal that does not belong to, he does not own, that the Yavam does not own. Also, the rabbis said it's okay b'di'avad, but they didn't say it's okay lechatechila. So why are you asking me to give him my sandal? It's mine, and so that's also b'di'avad. Okay, so he's communicating just with a gesture of a left sandal instead of saying it outright. Rav Yosef said, what I meant to say is, give him your sandal as a gift, right? Transfer ownership to him. It'll be his. It's true he could run away with one sandal, but that won't help him very much. But in that case, it would be lechatechila. Okay, what you see from here, this story is that it sounds like they could use sandals that they wore. Maybe not any sandal. It would have to fit the criteria above, cover most of the foot and so on. But it wasn't a special sandal that was used only for chalitza. This was a normal sandal that Abaye happened to be wearing. Okay, keep this in mind for the end of the daf. Sandal shel ayes. The Mishnah continues and says a wooden shoe is permitted. Mantana, who is the author? Amar Shemuel Rabbi Meir here he ditnan hakiteya Yosef bekab shelo. Dibre Rabbi Meir must be our Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Meir because regarding Shabbat, as we just saw, Rabbi Meir is one that says that an amputee can walk outside on Shabbat with his prosthetic. Meaning a prosthetic is like a shoe that he's wearing, and just like anyone is allowed to wear clothing, wear a shoe is not considered carrying. So to the B'meir considers it a shoe. If it's a shoe for Shabbat, it's also a shoe for chalitza, even though it's made out of wood, that's fine. Rabbi Yosef Omer, Avud Shmuel Omer, Rabbi Yosef Oser, sorry. Rabbi Yosef says it's no good. He does not consider a prosthetic to be a shoe. So he says that's carrying, and therefore also you would not be able to use it for chalitza. Abu Dishmael Omer b'mchupe od v'dibra kol. Abu Dishmael says actually you don't have to limit our Mishnah to be only the opinion of Bimeir, even though a stam Mishnah is a Bimeir, but still, if it could be according to everyone, that would be better. And so he says that in fact the Mishnah is assuming that this prosthetic is covered with leather, and therefore everyone agree, even a Bioseh would agree that a prosthetic that's not just made out of wood, that's covered with leather, is considered a shoe for Shabbat and a shoe for Chalitza. Amada Papi Mishmed Rabba Sandal HaMusgar Lo Tachlos Bo Vimchalsa Chalisata Keshera. If you have a sandal that is tameh, as leprosy, right? Leprosy can apply to a person's body, a person's home, and a person's clothing. So if you have a sandal that's a shoe that's musgar, quarantined, meaning there's some discoloration on it, the Kohen looks at it and says, we're going to put it in quarantine and come back later to see if it's still tameh or if it gets better. You should not use that for chalitza lechatechila. If you did, the chalitza is valid. Sandal muchlat lo tachlos bo v'imchalsa chalisata pesula. However, if it's a definite it's a definite tum'ah of leprosy, then you should not use that shoe, and if you did, it's invalid. Right? This is the final stage of a confirmed sarat. It's no good. We'll see why. Rav Papa Mishmed Rava Amar echad sandal muskar v'echad sandal muchlat lo tachlos bo v'imchalsa chalisata keshera. Rav Papa, however, in the name of Rava, has an opinion that's different. This is Rav Papi, this is Rav Papa, a different version of what Rava said, and says no, both a shoe that has quarantined a level of sarat or definite sarat, both of them you should not use lechatechila, but b'diavad it's okay. All right, what's the reason in the first version why there would be a difference between them? Why sandal muchlat would be no good? The reason is because what do you do with that, with such a piece of clothing or such a shoe? You have to burn it. And since it's declared to be, is condemned to be burnt, so halacha says anything that's condemned to be burnt, it's as if it's already burnt. And therefore, even though physically it's here, legally it does not exist. Legally it's just crushed into dust. It's like nothing. It's not considered a shoe. And therefore you're doing chalitza with nothing. And that's why it's no good, according to the first version of Rava, if it's a shoe that's a definite sarat. Okay, Metibe, we have a challenge to that Rav Papi's version, because it says here, Bait hamuskar mitame mitocho muchlat mitocho me'acharav veze veze mitamein bebi'ah. Regarding a house that has a moldy spot, a leprous spot on one of the walls. So first the Kohen comes and he says, oh, this doesn't look good. We're going to quarantine it and wait to see if it gets worse or it gets better. So if that's called bait muskar, how does one become tameh? If someone touches any inside wall, even without entering it, so you put your hand into the window and not your body, and you touch an inside wall, then a person will become tameh that way. If it's muchlat, if it's a definite tameh house, those the Kohen came back again, and it came back again, and it got worse and worse. Now that house is condemned to be destroyed. In that case, it's easier to become tameh. In that case, whether he touches from inside or even from outside, if someone comes and touches an outside wall, exterior wall, from the outside, they also become tameh. Now, in either case, if someone enters the house, well, that's the same as touching it from inside. Even if he doesn't touch the walls, entering into the house makes that person tameh. Okay, so that's what we know from Mishnah Negaim. Here's the question. If you say something that is condemned to be destroyed, it's as if it's already crushed and not there. In order to become tameh by entering the house, you have to enter a house. But this house, since it's condemned to be destroyed, does not exist. I mean, it physically exists, but legally, it's as if it does not exist. And so there's no way to enter a house if the house doesn't exist. And that would be a challenge to the reasoning we had here, according to Rav Papi, that a definite tameh shoe cannot be used because it has to be burnt, and therefore it's as if it does not exist. So then there's no way to actually become tameh by entering into a definite sara'at house. And the answer is, since the pasuk goes out of its way and says, and you will destroy the house, it calls it a house, even though it needs to be destroyed. Even at the time, that teaches us that even at the time of destruction, that is considered a house. So that's an exception to the rule. The general rule is something that is condemned to be destroyed, it's as if it's already destroyed and does not exist. Yes, that's true. It applies famously to a lulav. If you have a lulav that it comes from a ir hanidachat, a city where everything in it has to be burnt, that lulav is not valid. What's the reason? Because it doesn't have a minimum measurement. Even if it's a very big lulav, because it's condemned to be burnt, it's as if it doesn't exist. It's as if it's crushed, and therefore it doesn't have the proper measurement. So we say that is the general rule. But here regarding the house, the pasuk says, still calls it a house. So this is an exception to the rule. So no challenge to Rav Papi's law in the name of Rava that a condemned shoe is not a shoe. Tashema, next similar question from clothing. Matlit sheyesh bo shalosh al shalosh, af al pi she'en bo kezait, kevan shenichnas rubah lebait tahor time'athu. My love muchletet. Okay, here's the rule. If you have a piece of cloth that's 3 by 3 finger breadths, a pretty small piece of cloth. If something's smaller than that, then it's not considered a significant unit. It's not a utensil, it's not a kli, and cannot even receive tum'ah. If it is 3 by 3, it's still usable. A poor person can use it as a patch on their clothes. So it is called a vessel, and it can not only receive tum'ah, it can also impart tum'ah. If it is tameh from sara'at, then it can impart tum'ah in a house by entering into the house and makes other things in the house tameh. Usually, in order for something to impart tum'ah, it has to have a kezait. That's true like for pieces of a corpse. But in this case, because it's a whole unit of cloth, it can make something tameh even if it doesn't have a kezait. So therefore, a cloth that's 3 by 3 finger breadths, even if it doesn't have a kezait, as long as the majority, not even the whole cloth has to enter into it, but even the majority of it enters into a house that's pure, it will impart impurity into the house. That's the Tosefta. Now, what's the point? My love, muchletet, isn't this talking about something that is a definite quarantine? It's for sure sadat. Right? It's and therefore, now what are you supposed to do with this cloth? If it's for sure muchletet, that it's sadat, then it has to be burnt. If it has to be burnt, then it doesn't exist. It's shiur. Its measurement is not a measurement, right? Because it has no space. If something is like dust, then it doesn't take up space. It's like the theory of relativity here, and therefore it's not 3 by 3 anymore and should not impart impurity. So how come we don't apply the same law there? Doesn't this contradict what we said before, Rav Papi, in the name of Rava, that a shoe that is condemned to be burnt, it's as if the shoe isn't there and cannot be used for chalitza? And we answer, no, la muskeret. No, it's talking about a quarantined rag that it was not 100% sadat. It was just quarantined to be sadat, and therefore it's not yet condemned to be burnt because it could still get better. And so therefore it does exist and has 3 by 3, and that's why it imparts tum'ah to the house. Good. Hold on. You really can't say it's talking about muskeret, because look at the continuation of that Tosefta. Emasefa. היו בה כמה זיתים, כיוון שנכנס ממנה כזית לבית טהור, timme'atuhu. If this piece of cloth had a lot of the volume of it made out of, instead of being made out of thin threads, it's made out of thick threads, and it has many olive-sized volumes of it, then you don't need a majority of the cloth to enter. Even if just one kezait enters into the pure house, it will make the house tameh. Now, how does this work? If it's a confirmed sara'at, then that makes sense. Because something that's confirmed leprosy is similar to a dead person. We learn this from Parashat Shavua. Happens to be the end of Bahalotecha. Al natihi kamet. Moshe prays for Miriam, who received sarat. Let her not be like a dead person. So we see that someone who is a confirmed sara'at, mesorah, is like a dead person, and that's why a piece of cloth that or a utensil that is confirmed sara'at also imparts tent impurity, just like a corpse does. That's true if it's confirmed. Ela yemat musgeret, amayit kashlemet, but something that is only quarantined or waiting to be seen if it will be confirmed. So that's not compared to a dead body, and therefore that should not impart tent impurity, should not make the house impure. And so since the Sefa and the Resha really also is talking about tent impurity, it must be talking about muchletet and not only quarantine. And so what do we see here? That even though it's confirmed, the Resha, back to Resha, even though it's confirmed, it's muchletet, that it's tameh, nevertheless, we consider it to have a size of 3 by 3, and it can impart impurity into the house. And even though it's going to be burnt, we don't apply the rule that something that's condemned to be burned is as if it's already burned. So how can we apply it here and not regarding shoes? No, it's different. Pasuk says you shall burn the beged, even though it has to be burned, it's still called the beged. So it's an exception, just like it was for the house. All right, last, then why not learn from it? Okay, just like a piece of cloth, even though it's condemned to be burned, is still considered as if it exists and has a measurement, so too we can learn to that'll be a source for the shoe, and say even though a shoe is condemned to be burned because it's tameh for sure, nevertheless it should be considered like it exists and be usable. And the answer is Isur mitum'ah la gamdina. No, you cannot compare the realm of tum'ah and tahara halacha from two prohibitions. Chalitza being a prohibition. Is it permitted to remarry or not permitted to remarry? Because tum'ah is its own realm, has its own system and its own logic that cannot be applied to another area of halacha. All right, now what's the bottom line? Amarava. Hilcheta, echad sandal muskar, vechad sandal shem muchlat. Whether the halacha is that whether the shoe is only quarantine or whether it's confirmed to be sarat. Vechad sandal shel avodah zarah lo tachlos, or if it's a shoe of an idol, I guess that the idol is wearing, you put it on a statue, dress it up. Vim chalsa, you should not use that lechatechila. Vim chalsa chazil chelisata keshera. If you did it, then it's okay. We see we're following it off Papa's version. Both of these are okay. However, shel tikrobet avodah zarah, if you actually offered a shoe to an idol as a gift, or if it was in a city where the whole city is condemned as idolatrous city and everything in it needs to be burned, or if you made it for an elder, someone who is on his deathbed, and you make burial shrouds and shoes to bury the person with, these are not usable. These items have to be destroyed. Well, the dahat, and the one that's zaken is not made for walking, but rather a kind of adornment for the honor of this person, and so they are not considered usable shoes, and that cannot be used for chalitza. Amar leRavina leRav Asher, Ma'ishena zaken asu lichbodo, delav lehilucha avid, hadebedina name lav lehilucha avid. And Ravina asked Rav Asher, wait a second, what's the difference between the one that's made for an elder that he's going to be buried with it? That's made for his honor. But even though he doesn't use it for walking, so the one that's in the Bet Din, we see from here that the Bet Din had a special shoe that they used for chalitza, just like we do today. So this is different from the story we saw above. I guess we could use both ways. I guess Bet Din had a special shoe that they used, but maybe if they weren't around the Bet Din or didn't have it readily available, they did use shoes that met the specifications that someone might just be wearing. Okay, the one that's in Bet Din also is not used for walking. Nobody walks around in the chalitza shoe. It's kept in a special closet, and they only use it for chalitza. So isn't that also a kind of a non-walking shoe? It's one for adornment or special use. Symbolic shoe. And the answer to him says, well, actually, no, it is usable. Happens to be, no one usually uses it. It's probably only one shoe. It's not so good. But if the messenger of the court, if he wanted to use it, would anybody stop him? Would anybody tell him he can't do that? In other words, it is a usable shoe. People don't usually use it because we use it for chalitza, but it is in fact a shoe that you could walk around with. It belongs to the Bet Din, but someone who works for the Bet Din could in fact use it, and therefore that's why that shoe is the shoe made for chalitza. That's why it is permitted. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.